The afternoon sun was casting long, heavy shadows across the bustling city streets, a golden hour that usually brought a sense of serene peace to Dr. Maya Vance. She walked with a measured, graceful pace toward the local grocery store, her fingers wrapped around the familiar fabric of a canvas shopping bag. Mentally, she was tracing the quiet, ordinary steps of her evening routine, listing the simple ingredients that would soon fill their apartment with the comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal. Tomatoes, fresh onions, a handful of rich spices, rice and milk. It was a modest list for a modest, deeply cherished life. For Maya, a dedicated pediatrician who spent her grueling days surrounded by the fragile cries of sick children and the anxious pacing of worried parents, these brief walks were a sanctuary. They allowed her to shed the heavy mantle of medical responsibility and simply breathe in the anonymous rhythm of the city. Around her, people rushed past, buried in the glowing screens of their smartphones, or lost in the chaotic currents of their own private anxieties, completely oblivious to the quiet, gentle woman walking among them. She loved this neighborhood, a place where she and her husband, David, had spent the last 6 years weaving their dreams into the very fabric of the community. Maya was the kind of person whose heart was permanently tuned to the frequencies of empathy. She was a woman of profound grace, a doctor who didn't just treat illnesses but healed spirits with her soft-spoken assurance and unshakable kindness. Her world was built on a foundation of absolute, unquestioning trust, a trust she placed entirely in the hands of the man she had promised to love for eternity. As she approached the busy intersection just a block away from the vibrant market, an unusual sight caused her footsteps to falter. The air was warm, carrying the distinct scent of roasted coffee beans from a nearby cafe, yet a sudden, inexplicable chill seemed to ripple across Maya's skin. Across the wide asphalt street, positioned beside a sleek dark vehicle, stood a man whose posture was instantly recognizable to her. Beside him was an elegant woman dressed in a tailored, impeccably sharp beige suit, her posture radiating an aura of sophisticated confidence that stood in stark contrast to Maya's simple, practical attire. The two of them were standing remarkably close, their heads tilted toward each other, in a manner that suggested a deep, whispering intimacy. Maya slowed her steps until she came to a complete halt, her heart stuttering a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs. She moved closer to the very edge of the sidewalk, her wide, dark eyes completely fixed on the unfolding scene. Desperately trying to convince herself that her mind was playing a cruel trick on her, the man turned his profile slightly to catch the woman's words, and the air was instantly trapped in Maya's throat, suffocating her with a wave of sudden, paralyzing shock. It was David. There was absolutely no mistaking the sharp line of his jaw, the familiar slope of his shoulders, or the precise way he gestured with his hands when he spoke. But David was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be over 100 miles away, attending a prestigious orthopedic surgery conference that he had been preparing for over the last several months. Just that very morning, the apartment had been filled with the chaotic energy of his departure. He had kissed her forehead with lingering, tender warmth before stepping out the door, his heavy suitcase already packed and waiting. He had looked into her eyes, with that signature, reassuring smile that had always been her anchor, and whispered, "I will be back in 3 days, my love." Those words now echoed in the chambers of her mind like a hollow, mocking taunt. Why was he standing on a random city street corner in the middle of the afternoon? Who was this mysterious, wealthy-looking woman in the beige suit who commanded his undivided attention? Maya watched, entirely frozen on the pavement, as David reached out with a familiarity that shattered something deep within her soul, pulling the elegant woman into a warm, lingering embrace. The woman laughed, a sound that Maya couldn't hear but could clearly see in the bright, joyous tilt of her head, her manicured hand resting briefly, possessively on David's shoulder as they stood there, locked together in a private world. Maya's fingers lost all their strength, and the cloth shopping bag slipped silently from her hand, spilling its contents onto the dusty concrete. Tomatoes rolled into the gutter, but she did not even blink. The vibrant world around her seemed to instantly dissolve into a terrifying, blurry smear of colors and shapes. The aggressive blare of car horns sounded miles away, and the lively chatter of passing pedestrians faded into an oppressive, deafening silence. All she could see, all that existed in her suddenly fractured universe, was her husband, the bedrock of her existence, holding another woman on a public street corner when he should have been hours away. The sheer weight of the apparent deception crushed the breath from her lungs, leaving her stranded in a sea of pure, unadulterated confusion. When we think about Maya standing there, watching the foundation of her entire life crumble in a single afternoon, we aren't just looking at jealousy, we are witnessing the exact moment a soul realizes it might have been living a beautiful, orchestrated lie. The betrayal feels so profoundly intimate because it strips away the security of the past, rewriting every memory with the ink of suspicion. Maya bent down with agonizing slowness, her movements mechanical and stiff, to retrieve her discarded shopping bag. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely grasp the handles. When she forced herself to look across the street one last time, the agonizing tableau was already breaking apart. David and the woman were getting into separate vehicles, their movements casual and unbothered, and within moments, both cars merged into the flowing traffic, disappearing in entirely different directions. Maya remained stationary on the sidewalk, a solitary figure of grief, while the crowd of strangers flowed past her like water rushing around an unyielding stone. Her mind was a chaotic storm of frantic questions, each one sharper and more painful than the last. Who was that woman? How long had this secret life been happening under her very nose? Was their entire marriage, the laughter, the shared quiet moments, the promises of a future, nothing more than an elaborate piece of theater? She turned her back on the grocery store and began the long walk back toward their shared apartment. Her steps entirely automatic, her consciousness completely detached from her physical body. Every step along the familiar path brought a fresh torrent of agonizing memories. Every corner turned raised another devastating doubt. She began to re-examine the past month with a critical, hyper-vigilant lens, realizing how easily she had swallowed his endless excuses. David had been leaving their home earlier and returning much later than usual, his face lined with an exhaustion she had deeply pitied. Just some extra grueling shifts at the hospital, he had explained smoothly, kissing her cheek as he walked through the door past midnight. We are facing a massive shortage of orthopedic specialists right now, and the patients need me. Maya had believed him without a single shred of hesitation, harboring nothing but immense pride for his dedication. She had willingly, happily taken on every single ounce of extra responsibility at home to ease his perceived burden, managing the cooking, the deep cleaning, the endless stream of household bills, and the maintenance of their life, while he was supposedly saving lives. She had been ecstatic to do it because, to Maya, marriage was a sacred partnership of mutual sacrifice, an unspoken agreement that when one partner was overwhelmed, the other would step up without complaint. That had been their beautiful rhythm, their perfect, unbreakable balance. Or so she had foolishly, blindly believed. By the time Maya reached their quiet apartment building and began to climb the concrete stairs, each step felt as though she were lifting weights of solid lead. The physical exertion was nothing compared to the emotional suffocation pressing down on her chest, and by the time she inserted her key into the lock of their front door, warm, silent tears were streaming unchecked down her pale face. She pushed the door open and stepped into the pristine environment. The apartment was immaculate and perfectly organized, exactly as she had left it that morning. The breakfast dishes were meticulously washed and put away in the cupboards. The hardwood floor was swept clean, and a vase of vibrant, fresh flowers sat proudly in the center of the dining table. These were flowers that David had brought home just 2 days prior, presenting them to her with that warm, crinkling look around his eyes that she adored. "I saw these blooming, and they immediately reminded me of your light," he had murmured, placing them gently into her hands. Maya stared at the colorful petals now, wondering with a sickening feeling if those very flowers had been purchased with the guilt of a cheating man. She walked into their bedroom, her sanctuary turned into a house of mirrors, and sank heavily onto the edge of the mattress. Her tear-blurred eyes wandered across the walls, taking in the numerous framed photographs that documented their journey together. There they were on their wedding day, laughing beneath a canopy of white roses. There they were during a spontaneous vacation to the rugged mountains, bundled up against the cold, and there was a snapshot from her last birthday celebration. David's arms wrapped securely around her waist. All of those frozen, smiling faces seemed to actively mock her now, transformed from symbols of enduring love into monuments of a grand, devastating deception. How quickly the most precious moments of our lives can be corrupted when the lens of trust is shattered, leaving us to wonder if we ever truly knew the person sleeping right beside us. Maya forced herself to stand up, wiped the tears from her eyes with the back of her trembling hand, and walked purposefully toward David's closet. She wasn't entirely certain what she was searching for, but a desperate driving instinct pushed her hands forward, causing her to rifle through his neatly hung suits, his winter coats, and the dark recesses of his drawers. In the deep inner pocket of a heavy wool jacket he frequently wore, her fingers brushed against the crisp edge of a folded piece of paper. She pulled it out slowly, her breath catching as she unfolded it with precise care. It was not a printed document but a handwritten note, the penmanship indisputably David's sharp, elegant cursive. It contained a brief address and a specific time, 3 p.m., Rosewood Avenue, and written clearly at the very top of the page was today's date. Rosewood Avenue was the exact location of the intersection near the grocery store where she had just witnessed him. The reality of the note crashed over her like a tidal wave, washing away any lingering hope that she had simply misinterpreted a harmless coincidence. This note proved premeditation. It proved a planned, secretive rendezvous. Maya's hands shook so intensely that the paper fluttered to the bed like a dying bird. She sat down at her small writing desk in the corner of the room, her laptop screen illuminating her pale face as her fingers began to move across the keyboard, typing words she never, in her wildest nightmares, believed she would ever have to seek. Divorce laws, division of marital assets, legal separation procedures. The harsh clinical words on the screen felt completely surreal, as if she were reading a script meant for someone else's tragic life. For 2 agonizing hours, she immersed herself in the cold world of legalities, downloading forms and filling them out with an eerie, detached efficiency. Name, age, occupation, date of marriage. When she reached the section that demanded the specific grounds for the dissolution of the marriage, her pen hovered over the white paper for a long, painful minute. What was the truth? Infidelity? A total breach of sacred trust? A complete loss of faith? Ultimately, she chose the sterile, unassailable phrase, irreconcilable differences. She printed the documents, placing them into a stark manila folder, and then dragged her heavy suitcase out from beneath the bed. She began to pack her life away with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing a sterile field, folding her medical scrubs, her casual shirts, her favorite novels, and her daily toiletries, burying her heartbreak beneath layers of fabric. She knew she couldn't stay in this apartment for another night. She would go to her dearest friend and colleague, Dr. Lee, who possessed a quiet spare room and an open heart, at least until the dust settled and she could see a path forward. By the time the heavy evening shadows lengthened across the bedroom floor, the suitcase stood fully packed by the door. The divorce papers rested prominently on the bed, and beside them lay a freshly printed photograph she had taken with her phone. A clear, damning image of David holding the woman in the beige suit. Maya sat on the edge of the mattress, the silence of the room absolute, watching the digital numbers on her watch tick closer and closer to 7 p.m., the exact time her husband always returned from his long days at the hospital. Her heart was a hammering captive in her chest, counting down the mere minutes until the ultimate confrontation, entirely unaware that the truth awaiting her would completely shatter every single assumption she had made, setting the stage for a revelation that would turn her world upside down in a way she could never anticipate. The metallic click of the front door key turning in the lock shattered the heavy silence of the apartment like a gunshot, causing Maya's entire body to tense as she stood in the center of the living room. The door swung open, and David stepped inside, carrying the familiar scent of the outdoors and a bright, unsuspecting smile on his face. He set his leather briefcase down on the entryway bench with a relaxed sigh, entirely oblivious to the thick, suffocating tension that filled the air. "Maya, I'm home. You won't believe how exhausting the journey back was," he called out cheerfully, loosening his necktie with one hand while looking toward the kitchen, expecting to see her preparing their dinner. But as he walked into the living space and his eyes locked onto her rigid posture, his smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of profound confusion. Maya stood like a statue of ice, her eyes completely devoid of the warmth that usually welcomed him, holding the manila folder tightly against her chest as if it were a shield against a monster. "Maya, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," David said, stepping forward with his hands instinctively reaching out to comfort her, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. Maya stepped back, avoiding his touch as if his skin were poisonous, her voice trembling but incredibly cold as she spoke the words that would ignite the conflict. "I didn't see a ghost, David. I saw you. I saw you this afternoon at the intersection near Rosewood Avenue, standing right beside a parked car with a woman in a beige suit." David's face instantly drained of all color, his hands dropping to his sides as a heavy, guilty silence fell over the room. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, his eyes darting toward the floor as his mind scrambled to process the fact that his carefully constructed secret had been completely exposed. You told me you were traveling to another city for a medical conference, David. You kissed me, you packed your suitcase, and you looked me in the eye and lied to me, Maya continued, her voice rising in pitch as the dam of emotional pain began to burst. But instead you were right here in the city, meeting another woman in secret, laughing with her, and pulling her into a warm embrace in broad daylight. David shook his head frantically, his initial shock turning into a desperate panic as he realized the gravity of what Maya was implying. Maya, please, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything if you just give me a chance, he pleaded, taking another step forward, his voice cracking with an intense anxiety that she had never heard from him before. In response, Maya opened the folder with shaking fingers, pulled out the printed photograph of the embrace, and thrust it directly in front of his face. Explain this then. Look at the way you are holding her. Look at how close you are standing. I took this photo because I needed undeniable proof before I made the hardest decision of my life. David stared at the image, his breath catching in his throat as the absolute injustice of the situation began to settle into Maya's heart. She had sacrificed her own comfort, worked extra hours around the house, and given him her complete devotion, only to be rewarded with what appeared to be the ultimate betrayal. He looked from the photograph to the divorce papers peeking out from the open folder, his eyes widening in sheer terror as he realized his entire life was about to unravel because of a catastrophic misunderstanding. Divorce papers? Maya, no, please. You can't do this. You are jumping to conclusions without knowing the full truth. David cried out, his voice filled with an agonizing desperation as he reached out to grab her arms, trying to force her to look past her rage. Don't touch me. You lost the right to touch me the moment you decided to treat our marriage like a game of hide and seek. Maya screamed, her anger finally eclipsing her grief as she raised her hand, and driven by an overwhelming sense of pain and betrayal, slapped him across the face. The sharp sound of the impact echoed through the quiet apartment, leaving a bright red mark on David's cheek as he stumbled back, looking at his wife not with anger, but with a profound soul-crushing sadness. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, his hand slowly rising to touch his stinging face, realizing that his attempt to create a perfect, joyous surprise had completely backfired, turning him into the ultimate villain in the eyes of the woman he loved more than life itself. I am leaving tonight, David. My suitcase is packed, and I will be staying with Dr. Lee until the legal proceedings are finalized, Maya said, her voice dropping to a deadly, unwavering whisper as she turned toward the bedroom to retrieve her belongings. Wait, just give me 60 seconds, Maya. If you still want to leave after that, I swear I won't stop you. But you have to look at what I've been hiding, David yelled, his voice thick with tears as he frantically pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his fingers trembling so violently that he almost dropped the device on the floor. Maya paused at the threshold of the bedroom, her back turned to him, her heart tearing itself apart as she debated whether to walk out the door or grant him one final agonizing minute of her time. The air in the apartment was heavy with the scent of the fresh flowers he had brought her 2 days ago, a cruel reminder of the happiness that had existed just 48 hours prior. She turned around slowly, her face hardened into a mask of pure distrust, her eyes locked onto the phone he was holding out like a lifeline. 1 minute, David. That is all you get to justify tearing our lives apart, she whispered, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. David quickly scrolled through his digital photo gallery, his eyes wild with the fear of losing everything, until he found the specific folder he had been keeping hidden behind a biometric password for the past month. He turned the screen toward her, revealing a vibrant, high-resolution photograph of a magnificent 2-story cream-colored house with large, welcoming windows and a beautifully manicured front lawn. Maya frowned, her defensive posture shifting slightly as confusion temporarily clouded her anger. A house? Why are you showing me a picture of a random house? She demanded, her voice still laced with suspicion. It's not a random house, Maya. It's our house, David said softly, a single tear escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek as he scrolled to the next image, which showed a spacious, sunlit living room with pristine hardwood floors and a massive brick fireplace. I know we agreed to wait another 2 years before looking for a property, but I couldn't stop thinking about how much you wanted a place with a real garden, a place where we could finally plant roots and raise a family." He scrolled further, showing her an official digital copy of a real estate contract, clearly bearing his signature and the current date at the very top of the page. "The woman you saw me with today, the woman in the beige suit, her name isn't a secret lover, Maya. Her name is Caviar, and she is the senior real estate broker for City Heights Realty." Maya's breath hitched in her throat, her defensive walls fracturing just a tiny fraction as she looked at the official corporate logo on the documents displayed on the glowing screen. "I didn't go to the medical conference because the final walkthrough and the loan approval meeting were scheduled for this afternoon, and I had to be there in person to sign the deed," David explained, his words coming out in a frantic, emotional rush as he tried to bridge the massive chasm of distrust that had opened between them. "I lied to you because I wanted it to be the ultimate surprise for our upcoming anniversary. I wanted to drive you out there tomorrow morning, hand you the keys, and show you that every single sacrifice we made was leading to this moment." He scrolled to a screenshot of an email thread containing dozens of messages between himself and Caviar, dating back over 4 weeks, detailing property viewings, price negotiations, and structural inspections. "The reason I've been working late, the reason I've been taking extra night shifts at the hospital until I was completely exhausted, wasn't because of a shortage of doctors, Maya. I was doing it to accumulate enough extra capital to cover the down payment without touching our joint savings account, so you wouldn't notice a single penny missing." Maya felt the floor beneath her feet begin to sway as the immense weight of her assumptions crashed into the solid wall of reality. She looked at the photograph of the embrace again, but this time, through the context of the emails and the contracts, she realized that what she had interpreted as a romantic hug was actually a spontaneous, joyous celebration between a relieved buyer and a successful agent whose transaction had just been finalized. The villain she had constructed in her mind over the past 4 hours was entirely a fiction of her own fears, and the man standing before her, with a red handprint still burning on his cheek, was the same devoted, selfless husband he had always been. The profound injustice of the situation had completely inverted. It was no longer Maya who was the victim of a cruel betrayal, but David who was the victim of a devastating, heartbreaking lack of trust from the person he loved most. The manila folder slipped from her fingers, and the divorce papers scattered across the hardwood floor like fallen autumn leaves, completely forgotten as the shocking truth began to settle into the very air of the room. The scattered pages of the divorce petition lay completely still on the polished hardwood floor, a stark black and white testament to how quickly a lifetime of devotion could be dismantled by a single afternoon of unchecked suspicion. Maya stood frozen in the center of the living room, her hands pressed tightly over her mouth as a suffocating wave of intense guilt and profound horror washed over her entire being. She looked at David, whose head was bowed, his shoulders slumped under the immense weight of an emotional exhaustion that had nothing to do with his grueling hospital shifts and everything to do with the brutal shattering of his wife's faith in him. The red mark from her slap still burned distinctly against his pale skin, serving as a physical manifestation of the deep, unseen wound she had just inflicted upon his soul. The silence that filled the room was no longer the heavy silence of suspense, but the agonizing, hollow quiet that follows a catastrophic explosion, where the survivors can do nothing but look at the ruins of what they spent years building. Maya's mind raced backward through the past several weeks, replaying every single interaction, every late-night arrival, and every whisper in the hallway through this newly revealed, heartbreaking context. She realized with a piercing physical pain in her chest that while she had been silently nursing a dark narrative of betrayal, fueling her imagination with worst-case scenarios, her husband had been actively sacrificing his sleep, his energy, and his own physical well-being to manifest her grandest, most cherished dream. He had endured the grueling pressures of the orthopedic ward, and then spent his rare, precious hours off navigating bureaucratic red tape with Caviar. Also, he could surprise her with a sanctuary of their own. The sheer inequality of the situation struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had judged him, condemned him, and legally prepared to erase him from her life without granting him the basic courtesy of a conversation, while he had been quietly operating out of pure, unadulterated love for her. David slowly walked over to the sofa and sank into the cushions, his hands dropping limply between his knees, as he stared blankly at the scattered legal documents at his feet. The vibrant enthusiasm that usually defined his presence had completely evaporated, replaced by a devastating vacancy that terrified Maya far more than any display of anger ever could. "I really thought I was doing something wonderful, Maya," he said, his voice dropping to a low, husky whisper that barely carried across the short distance between them. "No?" Every single time my eyes ached from the fluorescent lights of the operating room, every time I felt like dropping from exhaustion during those double shifts, I would just picture your face when I handed you the keys to that house. I pictured you walking through that garden, planting your herbs, finally having a space where you didn't feel cramped by the city walls. That vision was the only thing that kept me going for the past 30 days. He paused, a bitter, humorless smile touching the corners of his lips as he glanced down at the word infidelity scrawled on her notes. I never imagined that the surprise I was building to protect and celebrate our future would become the exact weapon that destroyed our present. Maya dropped to her knees right in front of him, her packed suitcase by the door completely forgotten as fresh. Burning tears of remorse poured down her face, pooling in the fabric of her skirt. She reached out with trembling, desperate fingers to touch his hands. But for the first time in their 6 years together, David did not immediately close his fingers around hers. He simply let his hands remain passive, a silent, heartbreaking indicator of the massive chasm that had opened between them. "David, please, look at me. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking completely as the full weight of her failure as a partner crushed down upon her. "I saw you holding her, and my mind just caught fire with fear. I remembered all the stories of betrayal I see every day at the hospital. I remembered how you had been pulling away, taking phone calls in the dark, lying about the conference, and I let the terror blind me to the man you actually are. I didn't want to believe it, but the fear was so loud that it drowned out my reason." She looked up into his eyes, desperately searching for a glimpse of the unshakable warmth that had always been her anchor, but found only a profound, reflective sadness. When we look at Maya kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the literal wreckage of her marriage documents, we are seeing the true danger of assumptions. Silence and secrecy, even when wrapped in the most romantic intentions, create a fertile breeding ground for the mind's darkest insecurities, proving that communication is not just a tool for a relationship, but its very life support system. David looked down at her kneeling figure, his eyes filling with a mixture of residual love and immense pain, as he slowly reached out and touched the manila folder that had carried his condemnation. "The hardest part isn't even the fact that you suspected me, Maya," he whispered softly, his voice cracking with an emotion that shook her to her very core. "The hardest part is how quickly you gave up on us. You didn't demand an explanation. You didn't storm into my office. You didn't even yell at me when I walked through that door. You just quietly sat in the dark, filled out divorce papers, packed up your entire life into a single suitcase, and prepared to walk out of my life forever without giving me a single chance to speak. Did our 6 years together, our vows, our shared trials, mean so little that they could be discarded based on a single, out-of-context moment on a street corner?" Each word he spoke was like a precise, agonizing incision into Maya's conscience, exposing the fragile, insecure parts of herself that she had never fully confronted. She realized that, by protecting herself from the potential pain of betrayal, she had proactively committed the ultimate betrayal against their partnership, refusing to grant him the benefit of the doubt that he had earned through thousands of days of consistency, kindness, and devotion. She grasped his hands tightly now, pressing them against her wet cheeks, begging him with her eyes to find a path toward forgiveness. "I was a coward, David," she confessed through her tears, her voice thick with the agonizing truth of her realization. "I was so terrified of being the naive fool who got left behind that I turned into a monster who struck first. I destroyed your beautiful surprise. I insulted your honor, and I hurt you physically and emotionally. Yet here you are, still speaking to me with gentleness. I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve this house you built for us. But please, please tell me how to fix this. Tell me what I need to do to rebuild the trust that I just shattered into a million pieces." David closed his eyes tightly, a single heavy tear rolling down his nose as he took a deep, shuddering breath. The weight of the decision before him, hanging in the absolute balance as the evening light completely faded from the room, leaving them in the dim, uncertain shadows of their fractured sanctuary. The oppressive dimness of the living room seemed to amplify the raw, chaotic emotion vibrating between them as David slowly opened his eyes, looking down at Maya with an expression that was no longer just sad, but fundamentally transformed by a solemn resolve. The climax of their confrontation had arrived, but it was not an unmasking of a villainous husband. It was the total, agonizing exposure of Maya's own deeply rooted insecurities and the beautiful, fragile truth of David's unyielding fidelity. He did not pull his hands away this time. Instead, he gently gripped her trembling fingers, lifting her up from her knees and guiding her to sit beside him on the sofa, right above the scattered ruins of the divorce papers. "We cannot fix this by pretending it didn't happen, Maya," David said, his voice steadying as he assumed the mantle of absolute truth, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that demanded her complete presence. "You want to know how to rebuild the bridge? It starts right here, in the wreckage of this room, by unmasking the real enemy of our marriage, which isn't another woman, but the silence we both allowed to grow between us." He reached down and gathered the scattered pages of the legal petition, stacking them neatly before deliberately tearing the entire stack completely in half, the sharp rip of the paper sounding like a declaration of war against their mutual fears. This was the ultimate moment of triumph for justice, a beautiful and overwhelming scene where the truth did not just defend itself, but completely conquered the darkness that had threatened to consume their future. Maya watched the torn documents fall back to the table, a profound shock paralyzing her senses as she realized how close she had come to executing a life-altering mistake based entirely on a shadow, her previous panic transforming into a deep, reverent awe for the man sitting beside her. David pulled his phone out once more, opening the hidden, secure folder, but this time he tapped on a video file, pressing play, and placing the screen directly into her hands. No. The video showed David standing inside the empty, sun-drenched house on Rosewood Avenue just 3 days ago, holding a small video camera as he walked through the spacious rooms, speaking directly to the lens with a tired but deeply radiant smile. "Hey Maya," David's recorded voice spoke from the speaker, his digital self looking exhausted but incredibly happy. "It's 2:09 a.m., and I just finished a double shift, but Caviar gave me the keys early so I could check the plumbing one last time before the final signing. I know you're asleep in our cramped little apartment right now, probably dreaming of the garden we always talk about, but I want you to know that every single hour I spend away from you is an hour I am investing into our forever. I love you, and I can't wait to surprise you with this tomorrow." Maya let out a ragged, choked sob as she watched the digital recording, the final remnants of her doubt completely incinerated by the undeniable, historical proof of his devotion. The sheer emotional weight of the exposure was total. The fictional antagonist she had constructed in her mind was thoroughly unmasked as a phantom, leaving behind only the magnificent, humbling reality of a love that had gone to the ends of the earth to surprise her. David reached over and gently wiped the fresh tears from her cheeks, his thumb brushing against her skin with the exact same tenderness he had shown her since the day they met in the hospital garden. "I don't want your apologies anymore, Maya. I want your promise that from this moment forward, we will never allow what we see to override what we know about each other's hearts," he whispered, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears of relief. The complete triumph of justice was not found in a grand punishment, but in the total, beautiful restoration of their shared truth, emotional unmasking that forced Maya to confront her own flaws while simultaneously elevating David to the position of absolute honor he deserved. They sat together in the gathering dark, wrapped in an embrace that felt completely different from any hug they had shared before, an embrace forged in the fires of a near-fatal misunderstanding, yet stronger and more resilient than the foundation they had walked upon just hours ago. The morning sun rose over the city, casting a brilliant, clear light that washed away the lingering shadows of the previous night's storm. For Maya and David, this dawn did not just mark the beginning of a new day, but the absolute rebirth of their entire relationship. The manila folder and the torn pieces of the divorce petition had already been discarded, replaced on the dining table by the official deed to the house on Rosewood Avenue and the keys that symbolized their future. As they drove together toward the suburban neighborhood, the silence between them was no longer heavy or defensive. It was a peaceful, communicative quiet, filled with a newfound reverence for what they had almost lost. When David pulled the car up to the beautiful cream-colored house, Maya looked at it not through the lens of a suspicious investigator, but as a woman who finally understood the immense, sacrificial depth of her husband's love. They stepped through the front door together, the bright, natural light warming the spacious living room, and as Maya stood in the backyard garden, beneath the heavy branches of the mango tree, she realized that harsh karma did not always have to mean the destruction of a villain. In this instructive story, the antagonist had been the silent assumptions and fears within her own mind, and the karma she faced was the profound, humbling sting of her own remorse, a lesson that permanently altered her character, turning her into a partner who would never again let doubt override communication. David walked up behind her, wrapping his arms securely around her waist, and as she leaned back against his chest, the final pieces of their emotional bridge locked firmly into place. Life has a profound way of testing the foundations we build, forcing us to confront the reality that what we see on the surface is rarely the complete picture of a human heart. This journey explores the delicate anatomy of trust, proving that the greatest threat to love is never the external world, but the silent, unverified narratives we construct in our own isolation. Maya's life changed forever on that sidewalk, not because her husband had betrayed her, but because she learned that true loyalty requires the courage to seek the truth before passing judgment. What are your thoughts on Maya and David's journey? Have you ever experienced a moment where a massive misunderstanding almost altered your life, or where jumping to conclusions cost you a vital connection? Share your incredible stories, your insights, and your wisdom in the comment section below, as your experiences might help someone else rebuild a fractured bridge in their own life. If you found deep value, emotional truth, and a powerful life lesson in this story, please hit the like button, share this video with your family, your friends, and everyone you hold dear, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, dramatic, and morally instructive life stories that explore the true heights of human emotion. Thank you so much for your enduring support, for walking this path of truth with us, and may your own relationships always be blessed with absolute honesty, deep communication, and a love that can withstand any test.